Hey, Scott Spears here. Scott Spears now on WGH Talk, and have we got an episode for you today you're not going to want to miss. If you want to know about history, if you want to know about Marian history, if you want to know about the history of wars and the world and food, you are tuned into the right episode. Now, before we get to our guest, who I know you see here, he is a landmark in the history of Marion, who I go back with more than 20 years at this point. But I do want to let everybody know we've got the big groundhog celebration coming up very soon. Buckeye Guy, of course, will be back on the program very soon. We had a great episode with him last week that got great response, so we thank Buckeye Guy, and he'll be back with us very, very soon. Now, my guest this has been a banner year for my guest. He turned 90 this year. Can you imagine that? 90 years old. He's still driving. He's still getting around. He, this past year, entered the Upper Crust Society, which we're going to talk about that as the night goes on. And today, we're taping this on January the 19th, 2023. He was on the front page of the Marion Star, the paper of note above the fold, holding a banner of he and his father as the legendary Marion restaurateur. What a pleasure it is to welcome to my set, as it always has been for more than 20 years now, whether it's radio or television, the legendary George Kasotis. George, so good to have you here. I'm always comfortable when you're around.
Thank you, Scott. It's a pleasure to be here because I've always been with you since you started, and well, you know how I go back with Charlie and you and I, and many times, many shows, and we always had good times together. We've had good talks, because this is talk radio, ladies and gentlemen, and we know that you'll enjoy our show tonight because Scott's here, and later on he's going to have Buckeye Guy, which is great, and we're going to talk and visit each other and tell you stories that you haven't heard of. Some of the stories that I had back in the 30s and the 40s and the 50s, but the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, which the story today in the Marion Star says, those were the years that Marion was popping or hopping or whatever you want to call it. We said, hallelujah, we're here in Marion and it's thriving today. But the 60s and 70s and 80s were, the streets downtown were full. They're not that way today, but it's coming. And I know what's going to happen. It's going to be a big surprise for everybody, but building is going on downtown. You wouldn't believe what's going on in the old Balsinger building on the corner of Church and Main. It's amazing. All the new places that have opened up. But we've got a lot of things to talk about tonight, and I know Scott is he's waiting for George to come in the door with his tuxedo on.
Absolutely. Well, I want to tell people the story, and I always tell George to wear the tuxedo. Now, here's why this is. Years ago, George has had many restaurants here in Marion, and we'll go through that in just a second because we want to get that on the record, because I don't think we've ever done that on video.
Right.
But what happened was I went into Steve Dakota Grill, it's been many years ago now, and there was a gentleman at the door greeting people in a tuxedo. And I thought, boy, that is a nice touch. The man looked sharp, like 007, James Bond.
Maitre d'.
Maitre d'. And I thought, this is the greatest thing I've ever seen in a restaurant in Marion. And he's talking to people. And of course, it was my pal George here. So anytime after that, we've had to take a picture or we've had to do something on video. I always say, George, wear the tuxedo, because nobody looks better in a tuxedo than George. And it goes with him like bread and butter.
Thank you, Scott. That's wonderful. And those days back when I was helping, the story is I had sold my restaurant, and I was free. I was with my wife Joanne. We went to Steve's to have a dinner, and the owner was there from over near Mansfield. He has another place in Ontario, and Steve. Everybody gets that confused. His name is Mike. The owner of the Steve Dakotas, his name is Mike Severus. And Mike is a wonderful guy. He's an old friend of mine from the old country. He came from Greece, and he settled in Mansfield, Ohio, way back when, and opened up a restaurant. Then he opened up one, and there's one on the corner there by Ontario, something Roadhouse. Have you ever heard of the Roadhouse?
I've heard of the Roadhouse.
Well, he owns that too, but his brother Bill runs that. His brother runs the Roadhouse. Mike runs the one in Ontario, but he's back and forth to Marion, at the Marion Steve Dakotas. And so when I had sold my restaurant, and I was there having dinner with my wife, he came over and said, "George, I want to talk to you after you finish." And I said, "Okay." So we finished eating, and Mike came over, and he said, "I heard you sold your restaurant. I'd like you to come and work for me." And I said, "Well, what do you want me to do?" He said, "Well, I want you to go in the kitchen and check with my manager there, April, and I want you to show her some of your tricks from the restaurant business." And I said, "No," I said, "I didn't want to do that." But anyway, a couple weeks later, I was there again, and he said, "I really want you to come and work with me." So I said, "Okay, Mike, I'll come." So I spent a year in the kitchen with April. Now, April, right now, is the general manager.
Oh.
She's not just in the kitchen anymore, she's general manager, but April's been there for years, even in the old Steve Dakotas, down where Jimmy John's is. That's I don't know, most people in Marion know the old place too, but I stayed a year, and then after that I said, "Mike," I said, "I've had it, I'm leaving." And he said, "No, you're not. I want you to go put on your tuxedo, and you will be the first and only maitre d' I've ever had in my restaurants." So I became the maitre d' of Steve Dakotas in Marion. And the funny thing is, and the cute thing is, that people would come from Montpelier, from Bucyrus, from Kenton to Steve Dakotas to eat, and they didn't know who I was. And they would come in and say, "Well, hello, Steve."
They thought you were the owner.
Yeah, they thought I was the owner.
Yep.
They thought I was Steve. And you know what? I never told them my name was George. I just said, "Well, welcome, welcome." And I would always take the wife by her arm and take her to the table, pull the chair out, seat her down, and all of the husbands and the brothers and the uncles would say, "Wow, a maitre d' seating people just like you, Scott. Saw the guy in the tuxedo with the flower, you know, and the bow tie." Those were the days, my friend. I thought they'd never end, but they ended. And so now I'm retired, completely retired. And my wife, Joanne, who is the county auditor, has been for 16 years. And this last election, no opponent, so she won again, and she's there for 4 more years. And I think I'm going to be close to 100 by the time she gets out of there. But anyway, I'm going to stick around because whatever happens to Marion, I want to be here to pick up the pieces.
Well, she has been a very good county auditor.
Oh, my goodness.
Now, George, you had a relative, though. I learned this many years ago when you were much younger, that lived to 105. Am I right about this?
No, that was my grandfather.
Grandfather.
Emmanuel. Emmanuel lived to be 107.
107?
Yeah.
Even better than 105.
Well, the old country, you know, the fresh air, and along the Mediterranean there with all those olive trees and the lemon trees, you know, that olive oil.
Olive oil and lemon juice. Yeah. That's how you get to 90, right, George?
That's how I got to 90. You know that, Scott. I've been telling you that. I try to teach people that, you know, their eating habits, they should use a lot of olive oil and lemon juice.
And whatever you have.
Whatever you have.
Now, George, you've eaten red meat all your life. How do you get to be 90? What's the secret?
Just stay active, keep moving, and drink a lot of water, naturally, because my wife reminds me that all the time. "George, did you have water today?" I drink a lot of water, and I exercise. Well, walking is one of the most important things. Just keep walking, just keep moving, and make sure, you know, I love salads, and salad is great because you can put all the different accoutrements, you know, the lettuce, the tomatoes, the carrots, the celery, all of the vegetables, and make a big Greek salad. That was my favorite.
And of course the baklava.
Well, that's the dessert part of the Greek food recipes for dessert. What Scott liked one day when I brought him a baklava sundae with the ice cream and the cut up baklava on top and then drizzled with honey. And Scott Spears said, "George, what is this? You were like another man in Marion who was famous, John Isley. John Isley, ice cream specialist, came to my restaurant one day, and him and a group of people were there, and this couple ordered a baklava sundae, and John Isley says, "What is that, George?" I said, "That's an ice cream sundae with baklava on top and honey drizzle." He said, "Make us those." So I made them for his family, for his group. And after he got up and he said, he hit the glass with his spoon and he said, "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm John Isley, the ice cream guy, and George Kasotis had just made me a baklava sundae, which is the best I've ever tasted." So I got a compliment from John Isley.
And we should let people know, every time you go into the grocery store and you buy a Klondike bar, those are Isley's Klondike bars. That all emanated back to the Isley family, which John Isley was a part of.
Right.
And John Isley thought that the best dessert ever prepared, and I concur because I've had Klondikes, was George Kasotis' baklava sundae. Now, George, for the people out there, once and for all, like a good old cooking show, how do you make the baklava sundae?
Well, that's very simple. Well, it's not simple. You've got to make the baklava first, and that takes a lot of time because you've got 22 layers of phyllo dough. And you have your cut up, your walnuts, and your cinnamon, and you mix that all together, and you have to go on those layers. Not all 22 layers. You can go 4 or 5 layers, and then spread some of the baklava, the nuts and cinnamon. And then, but the most important thing is after you cut it, you have to have your honey and your honey liquid so that you can pour down the seams of the baklava, and that it's actually is sizzling. The baklava is warm and the water is just before it boils. You pour that over the baklava and it sizzles and it makes it crispy. The sizzling of the liquid over the baklava, and that makes it crispy. And the layers are like, what? There's 22 layers of baklava there. But don't forget now, the layers are phyllo dough, and that dough is almost, you can see through it. It's so thin. But you have to work very fast on that because if you don't, the phyllo dough dries out before you can finish.
So if we go back to, okay, so what is the mixture that you put in between the phyllo dough? What do you have to mix up there?
Well, the nuts.
What kind of nuts are best?
Well, the best is walnuts.
Crushed up walnuts.
But I mix pecans too. Pecans and walnuts.
So you crush those up.
You crush those up.
With some butter, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, and then you put the butter in, you lay the phyllo dough out.
Right.
And then you put the butter, the mixture of the butter, the walnuts.
You have to really butter down your layers. Each layer of phyllo dough, you brush it with butter, lots of butter.
Butter, and then you put the mixture in between each layer.
Each layer.
Of walnut and possibly pecans.
Yes.
And then you get it going strong.
Cinnamon.
Cinnamon is in that mixture. And then how long do you bake it and at what temperature?
Probably 250 for about 40 to 45 minutes. And it's done.
Done. So then you take your vanilla ice cream and you put it in a dish, and then you crunch up the baklava.
Yeah, you cut that up, crunch it up to like it crumbles, and then you spread it all over the ice cream, and then drizzle some honey over the top of that.
And that's the best dessert you'll ever have. That is delicious. The baklava sundae. I loved it.
Somebody was just talking to me the other day when we were out, and they said, "George, you're famous for that baklava." This one family that I know, the lady wanted to make it. She wanted to make it herself so bad that she made it, and she read the thing, and it said something about something for an hour. So she baked it for an hour, and it came out black and hard.
Oh, yeah, that's a little too long.
About 30, 40, 45 minutes is enough. Anywhere between, well, it depends on if you put it on at 250, 225. It depends on that. But no more than 250. About 225 is better because it might take a couple minutes longer, but it only takes about 35 to 45 minutes.
You know, I was down in Delaware not too long ago at one of their candy shops, and they were selling baklava, and it's pretty pricey when you buy it.
In Delaware, you were...
Yes.
Oh, yes, very expensive. Because it takes a long time to make it. And each layer, you have to do those 22 layers. Oh, my goodness. Phyllo dough comes frozen. I think you can still get it at Kroger's and Myers and here in Marion, but most big stores have phyllo.
Now, George, I want to go back to the beginning here so we get this all on the record. Where were you born? When were you born? And what was your growing up like?
Well, it's in the paper today.
I know it's in the paper. We're going to get it coming right out of your mouth here.
My dad was here during the First World War. He came here in 1915, and like it says in the paper today, that he worked for J.P. Morgan, New York Central Railroad. They laid rails across America from New Jersey to Pennsylvania to Ohio, ended up in Martell, Ohio, where the Pillsbury plant was being built, and they hired J.P. Morgan's New York Central Railroad, and they needed, 12 tracks. Don't ask me why they needed 12 tracks, because they were sending flour from the West Coast to the East Coast back in the late 20s, early 30s, because they were building that. Let's see. Dad was wounded. He came to America in 1915, but he at Ellis Island, the Morgan people hired all these immigrants. There were hundreds of immigrants from different countries all over Europe, and they hired them to lay rails across America. And Dad was one of the employees, but they were going from New Jersey to Martell, Ohio, of all places in the world, Martell, Ohio, which is on the other side of Caledonia. And they were laying rails there, and up until it was 1918, when President Woodrow Wilson, declared war against Germany, and they sent General John J. Blackjack Pershing to Martell, Ohio, on these what do you call those cars that are empty? And they put all these immigrants in those cars and sent them to Fort Knox and trained them. And that was in 1918, because they worked from 1915 from New Jersey to 1918 across Pennsylvania into Ohio. Oh, you wouldn't believe this. There were hundreds of immigrants, and they weren't all Greek. They were Spanish, they were Italian, they were French. Back then in Europe, those young guys were 21. All these guys, my dad was 21 years old in 1915. He was born in 1893. So 1915, he was 21. And they said, work hard, make money, so you can get on a boat and go to America, because in America the streets are paved with gold. And that was the reason all those immigrants came in 1915 to America. And they were coming into Ellis Island. And Morgan was smart enough to get all those immigrants and put them, well, he took them over to New Jersey and trained them how to lay rail. And after they learned how to lay rail, they went across Pennsylvania into Ohio at Martell. And they only were there for a year or two, and from 1915 to 1918. In 1918, when President Wilson declared war, here comes General Pershing and Martell, because they said, go there and get all those immigrants. There were hundreds of immigrants working. And they put them on a rail, sent them to Fort Knox, trained them only for a couple of weeks, because the war was on. And he sent them, my dad and all those immigrants, to the Argonne Forest. And that's where Kaiser Wilhelm, the German commander, the chief commander of the German army, they exploded mustard gas on all those immigrants. And 90% of those immigrants died right there in Argonne Forest. There was no way to send them back to United States, so they buried him right there. My dad was in the back. He got the gas, sent him to on a Red Cross ship back to America to Chillicothe, Ohio, where the Veterans Hospital is still there in Chillicothe, and he was there for a couple of years. And they had that Vicks vapor rub. That was the only medicine they had. And Dad survived, came back to Martel, had enough money to board on a ship, and went back to Greece, married his sweetheart, my mother, Theodora. Her name was Theodora, but they called her Dory. And naturally, they were together. They married there in Greece. And when Mother was pregnant, my father was already an American citizen, being in the United States Army, came back to America, carried me in my mother's stomach through Ellis Island. Is that crazy?
And what was the date you were born?
August the 2nd of 1932.
And where were you born?
Caledonia.
Caledonia, Ohio. How about that? Well, there you go.
Dad had bought a piece of property in Caledonia during the years that he was working in Martel. He was living in Martel, but he would go over to Caledonia because Caledonia was a little bigger than Martel. Martel was just a small little, but it was a railroad center too, because they built all those tracks and they're still there, but it's not Pillsbury anymore. There's another name for that plant, but they're still making flour there.
Yeah, Manel, I think.
Yeah,
Manel.
yeah.
Now, George, we talked not too long ago about you ended up at a PS public school in, where was that at?
Oh, no. That's back in New York.
New York.
Well, that's where my aunt lived, my mother's sister. This is a long story about my mother and her sister. They were so close that her older sister lived there. And when I was born in Caledonia, I was just a baby. Mother would go back all the time to visit with her older sister, because her older sister was the one that raised her, because her mother had died when she was a baby. And her older sister was like her mother, Vespina. And we went back and stayed with Vespina, and I went to the PS 117.
Now, this is great, because here's how I learned this. George was in the grocery store one day, and we ran into each other, and as he was going out the door, these schools all had songs back in these days, like the 30s and the 40s. And George started singing this song about public school, 157?
117.
117. George, for the audience out there, give us the song about PS 117.
You want to really hear that?
I do, it's a great song.
Well, how about Marion Harding? Dear old Harding High, keep it steady. When the battle comes, we're ready. You know, Harding High School had a song.
Well, we'll get that in too.
You really like that one.
I like the PS. You'll enjoy this, folks. Get ready. This is George Kasotis doing the PS 117 song. Here we go.
This is New York City. All the schools, no matter whether the small school, kindergarten from grade school up to senior school, every school was a number. There was no names in schools in New York in the 30s and the 40s, and they all had numbers. I happened to attend PS 117. Give me a second here, Scott. Cheer, cheer for 117, our school is always supreme, loyal sons of liberty, marching along to victory. Our standards are ever high, we will always reach to the sky. Stand by old 117, and you'll never ever forget that school.
That was good. I mean, that's been nearly 80 years ago, George.
80 years ago.
80 years ago.
And I still remember that.
Now the Harding song you were talking about, what is that?
Dear old Harding High, keep it steady. When the battle comes, we're ready. We will always be there with you, so nobody will beat Harding High. something like
Now
that.
that's the Harding High School in those days fight song.
Now, that was when I graduated from Harding High School, but I can remember the PS 117 better than I can
Well,
remember the...
it's because that PS song is catchy.
Oh, it's catchy.
It's catchy. We're going to teach that to Buckeye Guy later on. Now, George, you were a veteran of the Korean War.
Of the Korean...
Tell us about the Korean War.
You know, ladies and gentlemen, they called that the conflict, but there was not a conflict. And they also say the forgotten war. Well, I'll tell you what, it's not forgotten, because those buddies of mine that died over there in Korea in the early 50s, I was there in 53 and 54, those 2 years. I got there in 53, well, I was there in 53 and 54. And I didn't get back until 55. But I got wounded there, and that's why on those banners that were out the city streets of Marion shows me, I was only 19 years old, Scott. I was 19 years old then.
Now tell us how you got wounded.
An officer and I were we were actually the 21st Infantry Division, but we were attached to the 3rd Engineer Battalion because they needed help. And it's on my records, George Kasotis, the 24th Infantry Division, but we were attached to the 3rd Engineer Battalion of the 24th Infantry Division, and we were putting pontoons together about 50 miles north of Seoul, Korea, clear up on the Imjin River. And we were putting pontoons together so we could get our vehicles across this river. And I'm in a pontoon boat. We're putting these big metal clips in between the two pontoons. And as we were putting one in there, the monsoon came. Just instantly, boom! This monsoon comes and hits us, and broke the tie, the pin that went in. It flipped out, and we went downstream. We went down quite a ways, and we hit the pontoon hit a dry spot with a landmine. It almost blew my leg off. I got well, you don't want to see my scars, but I got scars all over my legs from that because it pulled my boots off. The pressure of the water pulled my boots off because, you know, we never did tie them real tight. And the boots went off, and I got my legs all scarred up. But I was in some water, and there, on a ridge close by, Colonel Sullivan and Captain McDermott, my 2 officers, saw that. And if Colonel Sullivan hadn't called for a helicopter at K-17, which was a few miles away, a helicopter came, lowered a rope ladder. I put my leg in there. I don't know how I did that because it was all bloody, and held on to that rope ladder, and they took me to a mesh unit where they cleaned me up, but they didn't have anything to really take care of me. So Colonel Sullivan came over, got me in a Jeep, took me to K-17, put me on a C-47, and went to Tokyo. And I was at the Tokyo hospital outside of Tokyo, a suburb called Camp Drake. Camp Drake, I have pictures of that at home, of Camp Drake. It is a big veterans hospital, and I woke up that morning and looked out, and I saw that mountain. What's that mountain? Fujiyama? Mount Fujiyama.
Fujiyama.
And that area there called Camp Drake is huge, and they have they have Japanese military and American military together. They're working at that hospital. And I was there for a couple of weeks, and they finally healed me up. I mean, I got enough to where I could walk around, and I had 2 weeks, or did I have 2 weeks or 1 week? I had 2 weeks vacation. They said, you have a 2 weeks vacation. And then I said, I'm going back home to America. They said, no, you're going back to Korea. So I had some $50 bills. It's in the paper today, the $50 bills that my mother gave me, because she said, if you're ever captured, throw out those $50 bills, and then you...
George, hold on. We got to go to a break here. We're going to get the rest of this story. The $50 bills, George Kasotis, and a plaque presentation you're not going to want to miss after this quick break. Hey, Scott Spears back here with the legendary George Kasotis. Now, we had to go to a quick break there. That in the business is what you call a hard break. and George was in the middle of a story about the Korean War and $50. So George, talk about your mother wanted you to have $50 bills and start there.
Yeah, she gave me she went up to the old Marion County Bank and got a few $50 bills. She said, George, if you ever get captured, pull them out of your jock strap or wherever you got them in your shoes or whatever, and throw them around, and maybe they won't kill you, or and to just tell them you got hundreds of those bills, and because everybody in the world knows American money. So I had enough money, and I found out through a group of people there at Camp Drake that the #1 hotel in Tokyo was called the Imperial Palace Hotel. It's right next to the Imperial Palace in downtown Tokyo. So I went there. I didn't have military on. I had a Hawaiian shirt and white slacks and loafers, and I didn't have any, it didn't look military. So I went into the taxi took me to the Imperial Palace Hotel, which is the #1 hotel. And I walked in there and I said, it's crazy. I said, I just had a little, not a duffel bag, but a regular carry-on bag for exchange of clothes. And I said, how much does it cost to stay in this beautiful hotel? The Japanese gardens were beautiful. The hotel was spotless, beautiful. Had a jewelry shop there, had a Mikimoto pearl shop there. And I said, how much does it cost today? And automatically they said $50 a night. I said, $50 a night? So I took out a $50 bill and I put it on the counter, and I said, he said, you're only going to stay one night? I said, if I like it, I might stay the whole week. So he said, yes sir, yes sir. They didn't know I was a military guy.
Oh, because you had the slacks on.
I had slacks with a Hawaiian shirt.
Hawaiian shirt.
And so I got the room, and they put me in the room. I changed, I went up, I showered, and everything changed. I came downstairs, and right in the middle of the lobby, there was two ways, the main entrance here and the side entrance here. And I said, where's the cocktail lounge? And they said, down this entrance on the right. So I walked down there, and as I walked down there, I looked out, and a limousine pulled up, a big white limousine, and two guys at the door that opens up the door for people to come in went out there and took the luggage. And this gentleman and this lady in a beautiful white white skirt and a white top. And as they came up, I stood there and waited for a second, and I said, my goodness, it can't be. And here comes Joe DiMaggio and Marilyn Monroe.
Joe DiMaggio and Marilyn Monroe. Now at that point, Joe DiMaggio was probably the most famous baseball player
ever,
and Marilyn Monroe was the most famous movie actress ever. Take a look at the video of her singing Happy Birthday to President JFK.
Oh yeah.
And you were right there with them.
They walked up, and as they walked, the doors opened up, and they came in, and I said, Joe, Marilyn, what are you doing in Tokyo? And they're looking at me like, well, I had put on a nice outfit. I was pretty well dressed. And the guys are going, the two doormen knew that I had pulled out $50 bills. And I said, I'm going into the cocktail lounge. Why don't you join me for a drink? Marilyn says, we'd love to. Joe didn't say anything. Marilyn was the mouthpiece. So we went in the lounge and sat down, and I ordered a couple of highballs, cocktails. And Joe says, I don't want a cocktail. I'll just have a 7-Up. Because he said, we're going over to practice with the Tokyo All-Stars. That Tokyo All-Star baseball stadium is as big as Yankee Stadium.
Wow.
And baseball is big in Japan.
Now I bet Marilyn had a highball.
Oh yeah, she had a highball.
I bet she had a highball.
She had a highball and I had a highball, and we sat there.
And Joe had a 7-Up.
Yeah, 7-Up. And so we sat there and talked, and we was in a little booth, a curved booth. Marilyn was in the middle, Joe was on this way, and I was on the right, and he was on the left, of my right and left. And we sat there for quite a while talking, and people were pointing to me like this guy is he might be a Greek shipping magnate, like Aristotle Onassis.
Absolutely.
Naturally, Marilyn wanted to be next to Aristotle Onassis. But anyway, because I said, I'm of Greek heritage, And the first thing they thought of was that this guy is a billionaire or a millionaire throwing $50 bills around. So anyway, I said, Joe, you're going over this afternoon to, that was in the morning, and then I said, you're going over this afternoon. He said, yeah, why don't you and Marilyn get together and come over to the stadium? I said, well, actually I can't because I've got a date with the Mikimoto Pearl girl at the Mikimoto Pearl shop. You don't realize this, but Mikimoto in Japan is the largest pearl distributor throughout the world. Mikimoto Pearls. And I had bought a cigarette case and a cigarette lighter. I don't smoke, but I carried that and bought a pack of Pell-Mell cigarettes and filled it up because I would always just press on that thing and open it up, and I got cigarettes and I got a cigarette lighter. Everybody in Japan was smoking at that time in the early 50s. So I bought that before I met Marilyn and Joe. So I said, but I asked the girl at the Mikimoto Pearl shop, I said, when you get off, can you take me, because I want to see a theater, one of the largest theaters in the world, oh, come on. Every year I miss that name. The Nichigiki Theater. Nichigiki Theater in downtown Tokyo is as big as the RKO Theater, or maybe even a little bigger, because it has 5 balconies inside. So I asked that girl at the Mikimoto Pearl shop, would you please take me there? And she said, yes, I'll show you the way. So I got to visit with Joe and Marilyn. Now he said, you can come and get Marilyn and come down to the stadium. And I said, no, I can't because I have a pre-date with the girl at the Mikimoto Pearl shop. Because I'm thinking, I'm not going to get messed up with Marilyn Monroe.
No, because she was a little loose in those days.
Very much so.
Yes. She had a few. I mean, you can look it up. It's not like we're talking out of turn here.
Well, I didn't want to say this, but while we were sitting there, she's in the middle. Joe's on her left, and I'm on her right. Her knee was rubbing my leg.
Oh, see, there you go. So this right here, this leg down here, has bumped up against Marilyn Monroe's knee.
Right.
That's history right there.
That's history.
That's history.
It happened, and my wife said, George, don't you ever mention that to anybody. And I said, why not?
Well, that's good, because Marilyn's been gone 70 years now, so that's okay we mentioned that.
How long has she been gone?
Oh, she died in the early 60s, I believe.
Oh, yeah.
So she's been gone, what is that, close to 70 years now. Isn't that amazing? That's nuts.
I like what you said. She's a little loose.
She was a little loose. I said it in a nice way. She's a little loose. Marilyn, she was singing happy birthday to the president for a reason. Now, George, we got to do this. How did you get in the restaurant business? And give us the chronology of the restaurants you had here in Marion.
3. Only 3 involved. All the years the 70 years that I was in the business, from the 40s. Actually, Mother was in there before 42, but when I got really involved, 32, 42, I was like 10 years old, and I was in the kitchen with my mother, helping her cook the food, but I would always take the food out to the patrons that came in. And one of the restaurants on South Main Street, around the corner from the home of Henry True. The Henry True house out there across from the old post office, right around the corner was our restaurant. And he was accustomed to going to that restaurant because the restaurant was owned by Henry, that name on that building just fell down in the last year. But the Bausinger building. Henry Bausinger owned that building on South Main Street where Luke, Henry, and what's his name is, they got that fence up there now on the corner of South Main and Church.
Alex Sheridan.
Yeah,
Luke Henry,
they bought that whole building there that goes down on Church Street. They bought that whole building, and they're remodeling that building.
That's going to look nice.
Oh, that's going to be beautiful. And they're going to make the sidewalk out farther so they can put people sitting on the sidewalk like they do on South Main.
So your mother was in the restaurant business in 42. Now, how did you join Mom in the restaurant business?
I was with her when I was 10 years old.
Okay.
I was in the kitchen helping her cook and bringing food out to the customers.
Now, what restaurant was that?
That was called the Home Restaurant.
Home restaurant. Now, what was the address of that?
176 South Main Street.
Okay. Then where did we go from the Home Restaurant?
From the Home Restaurant, we were there up until about 42, about 46, 42, 43, 44, 45, 46, between 46 and 47. We were there for 5 years. Then a man had a restaurant at 131 South Main Street, and it was called the Hamburg King. And that was back in the 40s. Well, he was there in the late 20s, all through the 30s. That was one of the most popular places in Marion. You could get a hamburger for 10 cents and a coffee for a nickel. For 15 cents, you could get a meal. And he came down to our restaurant, and he wasn't feeling good. And he also was of Greek heritage. And so he talked Mother into buying that restaurant. So we were operating the Home Restaurant and the Hamburg King up until 42, up until 52, for about 10 years. We then sold the Home Restaurant, and then we moved up to the Hamburg King. But in 52, we started to remodel the old Hamburg King, which was it was a restaurant in the front. There was a bar in the middle, and gambling tables in the back. There was pool tables and card tables. And I used to, at 11, 12, 13, 14 years old, I would clean spittoons and ashtrays and get a quarter for each table. And it was amazing those days. And then when I remodeled that restaurant, the old Hamburg King, I called it the Crest Restaurant. From the Home Restaurant to the Hamburg King to the Crest Restaurant. And then I had that Crest Restaurant for quite a few years, up through the 50s and the 60s. And I went back from Korea. I still had that restaurant. Then I needed to remodel it again because we were open, all hours of the day. Even in 1959, when oil struck in Mount Gilead, I was open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for 15 years.
Ooh.
From 1959, for about 15 years during that oil boom, things were crazy downtown.
Things were crazy.
Oh.
Now, what was the address of the Crest Restaurant?
131 South Main Street, 131. That is where Marcella is now, Byries.
So when you remodeled that, then it became known as what?
The Keg and Vine.
The Keg. Now that's the one people remember. Why do people have such good memories of the Keg and
In the
Vine?
60s, 70s, and 80s, for 30 years, the Keg and Vine was the spot in Marion to go.
The pianos, grand piano.
Baby grand piano. You would not believe the musicians that used to come there and play. But the main lady was Phyllis Miller. You don't remember that name?
I don't remember Phyllis Miller.
Her husband was a band director at Harding High School. Now, the whole family was musicians. But Phyllis was, when they started, remember the thing they started here years ago called the Follies?
Yes.
She was the music director of the Follies for years. Phyllis was.
And she would perform.
Right. But through a piano tuner friend of mine in Bucyrus, he came, I always said to Al, I'm going to buy a baby grand someday. I'm going to buy a baby grand and put it back there and have a piano player, a drummer, and a singer, and a trio. Have a trio. Bass, drums, and piano. So I'm going to buy a baby grand piano. So Al comes in one day, Ensminger, he was the biggest piano tuner in Central Ohio. He even tuned Ohio Wesleyan pianos. Al was the piano tuner of Central Ohio. And so one day he comes in and he says, George, I got a baby grand for you. And I said, where? Bucyrus, the lady's husband who played the piano. They owned the Timken? factory up north of Bucyrus, Timken. Have you ever heard of Timken?
I think I've heard of
Well,
Timken.
that family had a beautiful mansion in Bucyrus, and Al said, "Come with me." So we went and got Fred. He was friends with Fred Hardin. So was I. I knew Fred Hardin like a brother. Remember Hardin's music?
Oh, absolutely.
And we went down and got Fred's piano truck, drove it to Bucyrus, and went to this mansion. And Al went in up and because he tuned that piano many times, and it was a Brambach. And I said, "What's a Brambach?" He said, "Well, that was directly imported from Germany to here for the family that owned Timken." So I went up. I had a couple $100 in my pocket. In fact, I had $300 in my pocket, and I didn't know what was going to happen, how much she was going to ask for it. But we went in, and the lady was there, and she said to Al, she said, "You know, when he died, when my husband died, he would play that piano every day. And every time I come down, I look at that piano, I start crying, I want to get rid of it." And so I asked the lady, I said, "How much do you want for it?" She says, "I want you to have it. Just, if you can take it out of here, it's yours." I didn't pay a dime for that piano.
That's beautiful.
But I did give her the $300.
Oh, that's good. That's
I
good.
gave her the $300, and I got that piano, and I brought it. Al and I took the legs off, tipped it up, put it on in the truck, brought it back to Marion in the back door of the Keg and Vine, set it there with the legs and everything. And I think it was only a week later, Phyllis Miller and her husband Ed Miller, who was band director at Harding, and she was a piano teacher. They had lunch up in front, and I said, "Phyllis and Ed, would you like to come here? I want to show you something." And I went back, and Phyllis looked at that baby grand piano and went around and sat down on the seat. And I said, "Do something." And so she started playing that piano, and she said, "George, what is this?" I said, "It's a Brambach." And she said, "I've never heard that name." One of the most expensive pianos in the world. Brambach.
Now, from those great days of the Keg and Vine, how did we get to the Cafe George?
From the home cafe, from the home restaurant.
Right.
The gentleman wanted to sell. He was not well. He wasn't in good condition. He wanted to sell, and so we bought that We bought that, and that was called the Hamburg King. And from the Hamburg King, we went to the Crest Restaurant. Then we went to the Cafe George, we went to Keg and Vine. And then from Keg and Vine, while we're there, and Phyllis is playing that piano, for the next 15 years, every Friday and every Saturday, she came and played there with her trio.
Beautiful.
And her son played bass, and her other son played drums. And that trio would bring musicians. Well, we were there at midnight, because I was open till 2:30. I had a D5 license, so and back then, you know what? Drinks were $1.
Cheap.
Huh?
Cheap.
Well, it's not cheap.
Affordable.
I had cocktails, Alexander's, whatever you wanted. Everything was $1.
So with all the popularity of the Keg and Vine, how did the Cafe George open up?
After the Keg and Vine, it got its thing. Then I started having big dinners, you know. Especially the Marion Community Theater back then. The director was called Eula Watts.
I remember Eula.
You remember Eula?
I do.
Eula on the weekends, almost every Friday or Saturday, would bring at least a dozen people, including a young girl named Claire Cook. And I had Alfredo dining out on the sidewalk. And I would fix them shish kebabs with big beef and lamb and shish kebabs with, oh my goodness, it was unbelievable. I had shish kebab, rice pilaf, and Greek salad.
Good stuff.
A big plate of rice pilaf. That's rice cooked with a lot of seasoning in it. And I had that rice pilaf, big shish kebabs, Greek salad, and I had a Domestica wine from Greece, and 12 to 15 people were eating out there. And I had hired Habiba, the belly dancer, she would bring a couple of belly dancers, and they would come out and dance around the table. And South Main Street, people would gather out, even out in the street, to stop the traffic because those belly dancers. But Eula Watts was the one that had me do that. She said, "George, your food is so good, and we love that shish kebab."
So how did that become the Cafe George?
That was that became Cafe George.
Where the Kagan Vine was.
Yes.
And that was, so then why did you finally get out of the restaurant business? What year was that?
208.
208.
Marcella came.
She came.
Well, her and her husband came in 208. He was a jet mechanic, and he fixed 2 jet airplanes over in Mount Gilead at the plant there. And they took him to my restaurant to eat. And Marcelo said to me, "My wife is a great cook. I want to buy your restaurant." And he asked me how much. He said, "I've got cash."
Oh.
And Joanne happened to be there, and she said, "George, sell it."
And you went into retirement for a little bit.
Yeah, I went into there for a little bit.
Now, George, at 90 years old, do you have any regrets in life?
Not at all, Scott. Not at all. I'm just having a great life. I'm enjoying it. My wife is quite a bit younger than me, but that's only 20 years. But she keeps me going too.
That's right. That's right.
You know Joanne.
I know Joanne, and you've got a son, Chris.
Oh, Chris. Chris is he's substitute teaching right now.
Oh, very nice. He ran for public office, has done all kinds of things.
Oh, yes.
And unfortunately in life, things happen, and you did have another son who you lost.
I lost Eris, yeah.
Eris in a car accident.
Yes.
For all the people, and there's been a lot of people who've lost people, kids.
Oh, sure.
What advice do you give them? How do you get through that?
Well, you've got to think about your education first, because that's one of the most important things in life for kids growing up. Staying healthy, exercise, eat right, dream big, like Colonel Chuck Jones said, dream big.
Yeah.
That was a big thing at Martin Luther King Day at the palace. So we had a great day that day. And what was funny about the Martin Luther King Day, the keynote speaker was Chuck Jones. He's the commander of the whole state of Ohio State Patrol, and he mentioned that my 7th grade teacher was Joanne Kasotis.
It's nice when those things connect up.
Yeah, a lot of people. Tansy Addison came up and said, "Joanne, out of all the teachers in the school systems throughout Central Ohio, Chuck Jones mentioned Joanne Kasotis." Well, he remembers her from the 7th grade. That was important.
So George, for those people, how do you work through getting through the loss of a son, a child, any child?
Yeah. Scott, I don't know how I got through there. I was on my knees. Joanne and I were on our knees crying and praying when the preacher and the state trooper came and knocked on our door and said, "You just lost your son. He just passed away in an automobile accident down in Waldo, there at the intersection." It was icy when that car slid into that wall, and my son was asleep. It was a small car, and he was laying in the back of it asleep, and when the back of it hit that wall, killed him instantly.
And how old was Eris?
19.
19. So
He'd be 35 today.
We hear about Dom Tiberi and his daughter, and
oh yeah,
and it's kind of the same thing. Somebody comes to your door, the state trooper, and a
preacher,
and it's got, when they come, that's got to be the worst. I can't imagine anything worse.
No, that's the worst thing that can happen in your lifetime, losing a child. That is the worst thing. But Joanne and I survived it. What was tough? I don't know how we got through it, Scott. I don't know how we got through it. But Eris was, oh man, Eris is quite a bit bigger than Chris. And Eris is big legs, big arms, big. In fact, that one coach at Harding, I wish I could think of the name of it. A great coach. He went on to be, I think he even ended up at Ohio State. He said one time, he said, George, your son is one heck of a hitter on the field. He's a great ball player. And at that funeral, we had the whole team in the front row at the Hepworth United Methodist Church, and that was sad. But hey, we survived.
We survived. And I'll tell you what we survived to do here. Recently, how much time do we have left in this episode?
About 4 minutes.
4 minutes. Now, I want to let people know George is going to be with us next week, and Buckeye Guy is going to join us here. It's going to be amazing, George. We're going to talk about memories of Ohio State and Hopalong Cassidy, and Buckeye Guy is going to interject. It's going to be a lot of fun. But recently, George was with us on the day before Thanksgiving, and I'm a member of this group. Buckeye Guy is a member of this group, and Mary Ellen Withrow is a member of this group, and now George is a member of this group. It's the Upper Crust Society. Bob Welsh from Columbus, Ohio, who owns some pizza shops here in town, had George sign a pizza dough, a real pizza dough, took a picture on that day, and the plaque is here, George.
Oh.
You are now a member of it. Show it for the camera. This is a surprise here in our final minutes.
Is this mine?
This is yours.
Oh my goodness.
This is for George. Now he is a member of the upper. Take it out of the package there. George is a member of the Upper Crust Society with Buckeye Guy, Mary Ellen Withrow, and myself.
Oh my
Here it
God.
comes. Oh, look at that.
I can't believe this.
What a day that is.
Whoa.
The George Kasotis Upper Crust Society Award. Look at that.
That's amazing. Bring it over.
Yeah, we'll put that. I can put it here on the desk, George. That way we'll get a good
You
shot
got
of
it?
it.
Yep.
Beautiful.
You want to?
Beautiful here. Now this says the best thing to make for dinner is reservations. Opa. Opa. Greece.
Opa, the Greek greeting.
Now look
The Greek salutation. Opa!
And this is the day down here that George signed the crust. He was in here the day before Thanksgiving. This was erected on December 15th, 2022, and he is a member of the Upper Crust Society. Only four people in this? Mary Ellen Withrow, Buckeye Guy, myself, and George. We're the only ones who have these plaques. So George is now a member of the Upper Crust Society. George, at 90, and I've asked a lot of people this when they hit 90, do you ever think about death?
Oh yeah.
Do you worry about it?
No.
No.
I don't. I just say, how the heck with it. I'm gonna stick around to pick up the pieces.
There you go. And that's what we want. George, how do we say goodbye? Yeah, I want the audience to learn this. We got 2 minutes left. How do we say goodbye in Greece? In Greek?
Oh, there's many greetings in Greece. It's like we were at an auditors conference down in Columbus, and the head of the Auditors Association is Tom Pappas, and Tom doesn't speak Greek, but Tom says, George, how do you say Merry Christmas, Happy New Year in Greece? I said, Kala Christoulina, Ronya Pola. Kala Christoulina is Merry Christmas, Ronya Pola, Happy New Year. But how do you say? How
do you say goodbye? If we were signing off here, how would you say that in Greece? In Greek? I keep saying in Greek. I guess if you were in Greece, you would say that too.
You can say many different ways. Na se do epita. Thapao panos to what was that one saying? I wanted to say in Greek because it is beautiful. It is beautiful. Toda fiavis ke mafinis ke thapas makrias ta xena. Ta filia ta mirusmena ke ta loya ta xekna. Mimek xeknas makran supos nazisis. No matter where you go, I'm saying this in English now, I just said it in Greek, no matter where you go in this world, we will always remember you. We love you. Kisses, best wishes, everything that you can possibly say from your heart to you. Na se do epita.
We're George Kasotis, Scott Spears, heading for the dugout.